Have you ever wondered if your Irish surname is hiding a secret? Maybe you've been told your family descends from kings. Maybe you've heard that your name means warrior. Maybe you've spent years repeating a family story without ever knowing whether it was true. But what if the meaning you've been told is wrong? What if your surname doesn't mean what your family thinks it means? And what if one of the most famous Irish surnames in the world isn't even Gaelic in origin? Today, we're uncovering the hidden history behind Irish surnames. Names like Murphy, Kelly, O'Brien, Kennedy, Doyle, O'Connor, Fitzgerald, and many more. Because your surname isn't just a label, it's a clue. A fragment of medieval Ireland that has somehow survived for centuries. And by the end of this video, you may never look at your last name the same way again. Before we begin, subscribe if you enjoy Irish history, ancestry, and forgotten stories from the past. And while you're watching, leave your surname in the comments below. You might be surprised by what history is hiding inside it. Now let's begin. The first surprise is that Ireland was ahead of almost everyone else. Most people assume hereditary surnames became common across Europe at roughly the same time. Not quite. Ireland is widely regarded as one of the earliest societies in Europe to develop hereditary surnames in a lasting form. By around the 10th and 11th centuries, Irish families were already using surnames that passed from generation to generation. At a time when much of Europe still relied on changing personal descriptions, Ireland was creating family names that would survive for 1,000 years. Think about that for a moment. Some Irish surnames being used today were already becoming established when William the Conqueror had not yet invaded England. That makes many Irish surnames among the oldest continuously used hereditary surnames in Europe. But why did Ireland adopt surnames so early? The answer lies in how medieval Irish society worked. Ireland was organized around kinship. Family connections mattered enormously. Power flowed through dynasties. Territories were linked to family groups. Status was inherited. Allegiances often followed bloodlines. In that kind of society, names carried real weight. A surname didn't simply tell people who you were. It told them where you belonged, who your people were, which lineage stood behind you. In some cases, it even hinted at political influence. In medieval Ireland, a surname could function almost like a banner. And once you understand the naming system, those banners suddenly become easier to read. Because Irish surnames contain a code that millions of people see every day without realizing it. Let's start with the two markers most people recognize immediately. O and Mac, they're everywhere. O'Brien, O'Connor, O'Neill, McCarthy, McMahon, McDonnell, McNamara. But what do they actually mean? Mac is the easier one. It means son of. McCarthy originally meant son of Carthage. McMahon meant son of Mathcamhain. Simple enough. O is slightly different. It developed from older Irish forms such as UA. Rather than meaning the son of someone, it generally means descendant of. Historically, it could refer to a grandson, but over time it came to indicate descent from a more distant ancestor. That's important. Because many people hear a surname and imagine a direct father-son connection. That isn't usually what these names were designed to express. When someone carried the surname O'Brien, they weren't claiming Brian was their father. They were identifying themselves as part of the wider lineage descended from an important ancestor named Brian. The same applies to O'Connor, O'Neill, O'Donnell, O'Reilly, and countless others. The surname wasn't pointing to one person. It was pointing to an entire kin group, an entire historical lineage. And that changes how we should think about Irish names. They're not individual labels, they're inherited declarations of belonging. But there is another layer that many people with Irish ancestry have never been taught. The female forms. Traditional Irish naming customs included distinct forms for women. Ni generally developed from forms meaning daughter of. Nick carries the sense of daughter of the son of, and Bean identifies a wife. These forms remain part of Irish language naming traditions today, even though most English language records use simplified versions. That means Irish surnames weren't just recording ancestry, they were recording relationships. Family connections were built directly into the language itself. But just when the naming system seems straightforward, a new character enters the story. And this outsider changed Irish surname history forever. The name is Fitz. You probably know examples already. Fitzgerald, Fitzpatrick, Fitzsimons. At first glance, they sound completely Irish, yet Fitz isn't Gaelic at all. Its roots lie in Norman French. The word comes from Fils, meaning son. So Fitzgerald literally means son of Gerald. That might not sound shocking today. But historically, it reveals something important. Some of Ireland's most famous surnames didn't begin in Gaelic Ireland. They arrived from somewhere else. And this is where Irish surname history becomes far more interesting than most people realize, because Irish surnames tell the story not only of native Gaelic families, they also tell the story of newcomers, Normans, Welsh settlers, English settlers, Norse settlers, and families who arrived from elsewhere and gradually became part of Irish society. Over generations, they married locally, adopted local customs, learned local languages, built local loyalties, and eventually became Irish themselves, in many cases so completely that the distinction blurred. This is one of the biggest lessons hidden inside Irish surname history. Ireland's story is not one of isolation. It is a story of continuity and change, native traditions surviving while absorbing new influences, and surnames preserve that process remarkably well. Which brings us to one of the biggest misconceptions people have about their family name. Many people believe their surname has one clear meaning, one perfect translation, one definitive explanation. Unfortunately, history is rarely that tidy. You've probably seen surname websites that confidently declare, your name means warrior king, your name means lord of battle, your name means descendant of heroes. The problem is that reality is often more complicated. Many Irish surnames derive from personal names whose exact meanings are debated. Others evolved through spelling changes over centuries. Some surnames represent multiple unrelated family lines, and some popular interpretations are based more on family folklore than historical evidence. That doesn't make the names less fascinating. If anything, it makes them more fascinating. Because uncertainty is part of the story, real history is rarely neat, and Irish surname history is no exception. In fact, one of the most respected approaches to surname research is knowing when not to claim certainty. Sometimes the honest answer is, we know where the name came from, but the deeper meaning remains debated. That's not a weakness, that's good history. And it becomes especially important when we reach the surnames associated with kings, dynasties, and power. Because some Irish surnames carry echoes of figures whose names still dominate Irish history 1,000 years later. And the truth behind those names is even more interesting than most of the legends. Some Irish surnames still feel as if they carry a crown. Names like O'Brien, O'Neill, O'Donnell, O'Connor, and McCarthy don't simply identify families. They carry echoes of dynasties that once shaped Irish history. Take O'Brien, the surname comes from O'Brien, meaning descendant of Brian. Its prestige is closely connected to Brian Boru, the High King whose legacy remains one of the most powerful in Irish historical memory. Or consider O'Neill. The name links to Niall and the wider Uí Néill dynastic world, one of the most influential political groupings in early medieval Ireland. Then there is O'Donnell, associated with one of the great ruling families of Donegal, and O'Connor, a name connected to several royal lineages across Ireland. But here's the important distinction many people miss. Having one of these surnames does not automatically prove direct descent from a famous king. What it does mean is that the surname emerged within a naming tradition associated with that dynasty, lineage, or ancestral figure. That difference matters. A royal surname can survive long after royal power disappears. A dynasty name can pass into ordinary farming families. A famous lineage can leave behind millions of descendants spread across centuries. The name preserves the memory. The paper trail is another matter entirely. And that's what makes surname history so fascinating. It sits somewhere between memory and evidence, between legend and documentation. If you've ever been told your family descends from royalty, let me know in the comments. Because sometimes the truth is even more interesting than the myth. But not every respected surname in Ireland came from kings and warriors. Some came from scholars, poets, craftsmen, people whose influence came from knowledge rather than power. One of the best examples is Mac and Byrne. The name literally means son of the bard. In medieval Ireland, bards were far more than entertainers. They preserved history, recorded genealogies, praised rulers, remembered victories, and sometimes shaped reputations that lasted for centuries. A bard could help immortalize a family name. That's an extraordinary responsibility. Another example is MacGabhan. The root word refers to a smith or blacksmith. Over time, it produced surnames such as McGowan and related forms. Think about what that meant in the medieval world. Blacksmiths made tools, weapons, horse fittings, essential equipment for everyday life. Without them, society struggled to function. These occupational surnames reveal something important. Prestige in Ireland wasn't limited to kings and warriors. Knowledge mattered, skill mattered, craftsmanship mattered. Some families earned their place in history through what they created, not through what they conquered. And in many ways, that's just as impressive. Then there are surnames connected to place. These are often harder to spot. Unlike England, where many surnames directly reference villages or landscapes, Irish surnames more commonly point toward ancestry. But location still mattered enormously. Families were associated with territories, kingdoms, valleys, regions. And over time, those geographical connections became part of identity. And this is one reason surnames can be so valuable for genealogy. A surname may not tell you exactly where your family began, but it can often point toward historical concentrations within certain counties or provinces. And that clue can be priceless when trying to trace family history. Sometimes one county can reveal more than 100 surname meanings. Then the story takes another dramatic turn, because in the 12th century, Ireland experienced one of the most important transformations in its history. The arrival of the Normans brought castles, military power, new political structures, and new surnames. Names such as Fitzgerald, Power, Burke, Wall, Barry, and Roche. Many of these surnames were not Gaelic in origin, yet over time they became deeply woven into Irish life. The Fitzgeralds are perhaps the most famous example, originally Norman. Eventually among the most powerful families in Ireland, so powerful in fact, that later generations described some Norman families as being more Irish than the Irish themselves. Whether entirely true or not, the phrase captures something important. Irish identity has always evolved. It has always absorbed new influences. And surnames provide some of the clearest evidence of that process. But if the Norman arrival changed Irish surnames, another transformation changed them even more dramatically. Anglicization. This is where countless family histories become difficult to follow. As English administration expanded across Ireland, Gaelic names increasingly had to be recorded in English, and English scribes often struggled to represent Irish sounds accurately. The result was centuries of spelling changes. Some names were simplified, some were shortened, some were altered beyond easy recognition, and some appeared under multiple spellings at the same time. This is why genealogy can be so challenging. One family line may appear under several different surname forms across generations. A spelling difference does not necessarily mean a different family. In fact, it often means exactly the opposite. The same family, different record keeper, different spelling, different century. You might see Mac shortened to Meps. You might see prefixes disappear entirely. You might find names translated into English forms or reshaped into spellings that would have seemed unfamiliar to the original family. Later, during periods of cultural revival, some families restored older forms. The O returned, the Mac returned, older spellings reappeared. And the story continued evolving. That is not corruption. That is adaptation. That is survival. And survival is one of the most important themes in Irish surname history, because eventually those surnames left Ireland altogether. Millions of people carried them across oceans. Some left by choice. Others had little choice at all. Economic hardship, migration, opportunity, displacement, and most famously, the Great Famine. All helped spread Irish surnames around the world. Murphy, Kelly, Ryan, O'Brien, Kennedy, Doyle, Gallagher. Today, these names can be found across Britain, North America, Australia, New Zealand, and far beyond. For many descendants of the Irish diaspora, a surname becomes the first surviving connection to Ireland. Long before parish is known, long before records are discovered, long before DNA results arrive, the surname is often the first clue, and sometimes the only clue. Which brings us to the names themselves. Let's separate popular myths from historical reality. Murphy comes from O Murchada, meaning descendant of Murchad. The personal name Murchad is often interpreted through elements associated with sea and battle. The popular translation sea warrior is widely repeated, but should be viewed as an interpretation rather than an exact definition. Kelly usually comes from O'Chelai, meaning descendant of Chelach. The deeper meaning of Chelach remains debated by scholars, which is why confident one-line translations should be treated cautiously. O'Sullivan comes from O Suilebhain. The surname identifies descendants of Suilebhan, but the exact meaning behind the original personal name remains uncertain. Walsh is one of the most straightforward. The name literally refers to Welsh or Brittonic origins, and often identified families associated with Wales or Britain who settled in Ireland. O'Brien means descendant of Brian, O'Neill means descendant of Niall, O'Connor means descendant of Conchobar. All three carry strong historical associations with important dynasties. Ryan is more complicated than many people realize. Several possible origins exist, making simplistic explanations unreliable. Byrne generally derives from O'Broin and is often linked to roots associated with the raven. McCarthy comes from MacCarthay, meaning son of Carthag. The personal name Carthag is often interpreted as loving or charitable. Doyle comes from Odubagail, often understood as descendant of Dubagal, a name historically associated with Norse or foreign origins. Kennedy comes from O'Cinede. The traditional interpretation involves elements associated with a head or helmeted appearance, although exact translations vary. Gallagher comes from O'Galchibhair. Like many ancient surnames, its deeper meaning remains debated. Fitzgerald remains one of the clearest examples of a Norman surname becoming thoroughly Irish. And that single surname perfectly illustrates the larger story. Irish surnames are not frozen relics. They are living records of migration, adaptation, language change, political upheaval, and cultural blending. Which leads to the biggest mistake people make when researching their surname. They assume the meaning solves the mystery. It doesn't. A surname is only the beginning. Real family history requires multiple pieces working together: surname evidence, regional evidence, documentary evidence, parish records, civil registrations, land records, census returns, local history, variant spellings, and sometimes DNA evidence. DNA can be useful, but it works best when supporting documentary research rather than replacing it. The strongest family histories are built from multiple sources, not a single clue. If you're researching your own Irish surname, start at home, gather names, dates, places, letters, family stories, old photographs, prayer cards, anything that connects generations. Then anchor those people to specific places. Counties matter, parishes matter, locations matter far more than most beginners realize, and always keep an open mind about spelling variations. The spelling you inherited today may only be one version of a much older name, which brings us to the real reason all of this matters. A surname is not simply an etymology, it is memory compressed into a single word. For some families, that memory points toward kings. For others, blacksmiths, poets, farmers, clergy, merchants, settlers, migrants, or survivors. Not every surname leads to nobility, but every surname leads to people. Real people. People who lived through conquest, war, famine, migration, language change, and extraordinary historical upheaval. Yet somehow their name endured, and perhaps that is the most remarkable thing of all. So, what does your Irish surname really mean? Maybe it points to an ancient ancestor. Maybe it recalls a trade. Maybe it preserves the memory of a dynasty. Maybe it records a foreign arrival who became Irish generations later. Or maybe it leads back to a personal name whose true meaning scholars still debate. But uncertainty isn't a flaw in the story, it is the story. Because Irish surnames were shaped by 1,000 years of change, and through all of that change, they survived. The next time someone asks your surname, remember this. They are not simply hearing a name, they are hearing the echo of medieval Ireland. A family, a lineage, a migration, a survivor, and a story. And after centuries of history, that story is still alive every time your name is spoken. Now tell us in the comments, what is your Irish surname? And what family story have you been told about it? Because the next great surname mystery might be yours. Thank you.